Hello, and thanks for joining me on Facebook Live. I'm with you from the beautiful mountains near Clayton, Georgia, in Rabun County, where, as they say, spring spends the summer. My name is Dave Cooper, and I am running for the U.S. congressional seat representing North Georgia, the Georgia 9th. Over the next few minutes, I'm going to tell you why I decided to run, some of my top priorities, and why I am the best candidate to write the laws that impact the 350 million people living in this country, part of 7.7 billion people on the planet, and uncountable trillions of other life that share our world. In the military, they teach you to brief using the bottom-up first approach. In other words, the key items first. So let me first note what I offer as a candidate. I'm a retired American soldier. I speak the language of patriotism and sacrifice. I founded a humanitarian nonprofit organization. I speak the language of charity. I served the public in numerous city and county and federal positions. I speak the language of service, public participation, legislation, regulation. I spent my own money to test new energy-saving home construction techniques. I speak the language of innovation. And I volunteered in political campaigns, 11 times in 7 states over 14 years. I speak the language of democracy. Like you, I understand the working world. I have stood long hours behind milling machines and drill presses, flipped burgers, cooked fries. I've cleaned classrooms and toilets, spray painted and assembled equipment. And yes, when times were toughest and my family was hurting, sold flowers on the street corner. I've been unemployed. I get it. In the towns of North Georgia, small businesses are the real job creators, not corporations, but they never have the clout in Congress to serve their needs. My district must have the most favorable business conditions, including for their workers. I also understand the government world. I have worked for a small city, 2 urban counties, a consortium of the 13 Western states, and finally, at my dream job, protecting human health and the environment at the federal level. I've written federal regulations and provided input into federal programs. I've negotiated across federal agencies, the Department of Defense, the Department of Energy, and with state regulatory partners. And I understand the nonprofit world. After I returned from Operation Iraqi Freedom, I founded a nonprofit to carry on the work that I began as a soldier in the peacekeeping forces that were in Bosnia to end that genocidal war. It was called Schools to Schools Aid Project, and it sent over 1,400 boxes of used and new school supplies to students in Afghanistan, Horn of Africa, and Honduras through our American soldiers. This helps keep soldiers safer by developing trust relationships with those who are suffering and are victims of war. One of my unexpected joys was seeing how much American students are hungry to serve. We should do everything we can to acknowledge, encourage, enable, and model that behavior. And I even understand the fourth estate, having worked as a freelance journalist covering local politics, business, and human interest stories. The media is under explicit attack, which at one point stopped, the Trump administration at one point stopped true journalists from covering the daily briefings, but instead gave press credentials to blatant propaganda organizations that front for racists and fascists. President Trump tweeted that the press is the enemy of the American people. Our founding fathers would curse such a threat. Undermining the work of true journalists undermines America. So here's why I'm running. Over the course of 2017, I had many moments of outrage, but the final straw came in late December when I learned that the Republican-controlled Senate had passed a massive tax giveaway to the wealthy and large corporations at 2 a.m. in the morning, with handwritten notes in the bill's margins of the deals they'd cut. Some of it was even illegible. The bill was forced through without a final analysis by the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, and there were 0 public hearings conducted to get the sound counsel of dozens of think tanks and public interest groups, as well as the rest of us. That is not how laws should be made, and all those voting were Republican. This tax giveaway blows at least a $1.5 trillion hole in the existing federal deficit, currently already at $20.5 trillion, something our children and grandchildren will have to pay. Experts conclude that the top 1% receives a third of the benefits, and the bottom fifth, maybe 50 million Americans, receives essentially nothing. Warren Buffett says that his company gained $29 billion. In what world is that fair? As monumentally unfair as this tax law is, what compels me to run for office is the way the legislative process was conducted. The process of passing this tax bill is the canary in the coal mine, a warning that we are at risk of losing our democracy. Now that's a pretty strong statement, but it's not hyperbole. This is not about the vote. People vote in Russia. People vote in Cuba. People vote in Iran. Even with the vote, their systems are not democratic because their voices are not heard. All decisions in those countries are made at the top by dictators. Violating due process and their oaths of office to ignore established rules and regulations is part of a pattern of Republican Party abuse, including naked obstructionism that began in 2008. Then in 2016, over 73 million people voted against Donald Trump, who still became president. An incompetent con man who needed a cue card to help him fake empathy as he struggled through a TV listening session with student victims of the horrific Parkland, Florida massacre. Trump immediately filled his cabinet with incompetent or ignorant department heads, many of whom had been attacking those departments for years. The Republicans and Trump have violated nearly every norm of the conduct of their political offices. Here's just a few examples. Republicans passing bills without any review, for instance, the tax theft of 2017. Trump passing military secrets to the Russians without following the review process of our intelligence agencies, literally just to show off. Republicans relentlessly pursuing expensive partisan investigations that have resulted in 0 indictments. Trump attacking our law enforcement organizations, the FBI and Justice Department. Trump attacking our judicial system, including nominating grossly incompetent lawyers to fill vacancies like the man who had never tried a case. Trump attacking our intelligence services, CIA, NSA. Trump defying Congress on Russian sanctions without any basis in law. And overwhelmingly, those were voted for by both houses of Congress. McConnell refusing to act under the explicit charge of the Constitution to fill a Supreme Court vacancy during the Obama administration. Trump exposing our national secrets, perhaps even our international spy network, to people and family members without completed security clearances. Trump pardoning a political ally, the former Arizona sheriff, for criminal contempt of court, a dangerous precedent that defying court orders is somehow rewarded. Trump and Paul Ryan removing the head of the U.S. Election Assistance Commission, the agency that helps states protect elections from cyber attack, exactly what we experienced in 2016. Trump unilaterally canceling the German bank money laundering fines that our government spent years to convict, including Deutsche Bank, where he still owes maybe $160 million. Republicans actively resisting the efforts to uncover Russian collusion in the 2016 election and making partisan attacks on Vietnam veteran and former FBI chief Robert Mueller, whose probe has already resulted in guilty pleas from Trump, former staff, and indictments of 13 Russians. You don't have to know every detail of the items I've mentioned to know that something is horribly wrong with Congress and the presidency. You just need common sense. I fear that the Republicans seek not democracy, but dictatorship. And where was Doug Collins during all of these attacks on democracy and good governance? Supporting Trump. One more thought before I talk about just some of my campaign issues. During the campaign, Donald Trump bragged that eliminating the US budget deficit would be easy for a businessman like him. And he even suggested that retiring the entire national debt was potentially doable by the time he left office. But Trump's latest budget actually increases the deficit. Voodoo economics. The Great Depression of the 30s, the Great Recession of '81, and the Near Depression of 2007 all happened under Republicans. It is a fiction that the Republican Party is better at managing the nation's economy. They hurt the future of seniors, children, and working families. It's not the mom and pop grocery store that sends jobs overseas. It's not the craft shop or the family farm or the auto repair shop. It's not but it is the corporations that just got billions. No, over $1 trillion in total handed to them as a thank you by Republican lawmakers who they own through unlimited campaign contributions. By comparison, Democrats live by the belief that the federal budget is a statement of our values. So let me talk about some of my key issues. First of all, clean elections. This is the bedrock of our democracy. Every vote counts, and every vote must be counted. It must be a crime against democracy for anyone to try to influence an election by violating any part of the voting process. All forms of voter intimidation and voter suppression must be criminalized, including confusing voters with dirty tricks. That means that if a group sponsors a phone bank to call members of the opposite party and tell them that election day is the day after the actual election day, that's a federal crime. And if they conspire to compromise voting machines or their output, that is a big felony with a go to jail for life consequence. This holds true for the proponents of any state legislature that masks an attempt at voter suppression or gerrymandering. I will repair the Voting Rights Act of '64 that supports the 15th Amendment. In technical terms, I will pass legislation to enact a new coverage formula for Section 4B, which supports Section 5, which is the pre-clearance requirement, which the court did not strike down. Term limits for all political seats, especially, so the next issue is term limits for all political seats, especially the US Congress. Amazingly, at least to me, congressional re-election rates stand around 90%, despite congressional approval ratings of less than 20%. This confirms that the Congress stagnates due to the dangerous advantage of incumbency. The 22nd Amendment holds the US presidency to 2 terms, and nearly half of the states also have had term limits. 75% of Americans favor term limits. When 3/4 of the voters want something, it should happen. Term limits encourage innovation and competition. I will work across the aisle to achieve the will of the American public. Protect and restore Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. A recent Republican candidate fully represents the current Republican position on the social safety net. And he said, "No one has the guts to just let poor people wither and die." However, Canada Trump said on national TV, "And it's my absolute intention to leave Social Security the way it is, not increase the age." Now, all 3 legs of the social safety net are being cut under the current proposed budget. The Republican Party is treating your Social Security as their money and their handout to be withdrawn as they see fit. We paid our money into Social Security instead of getting a direct salary for that portion. It's our money. I would reverse the Trump tax theft for the wealthy of 2017. The only major piece of legislation the Republicans have passed gives them personally more money. This tax bill provides massive permanent tax cuts for the rich and the wealthy corporations, a tiny temporary tax cut for the middle income workers, and barely provides crumbs for the poor. For most of us, the gain is temporary, petering out within 2 years, but after voters have gratefully voted for Republicans. Even the minor gain might be eaten up by other taxes or the removal of deductions. So basically, the Republicans were slipping dimes into your right pocket while they were stealing dollars out of your left. All under the fiction of reform. When Republicans say reform, they always mean cut every time, and the vulnerable lose. So I will reverse the tax theft of 2017. The reality is 70% of our economy is consumer spending, and there are simply not enough wealthy people to buy all of the goods and services to support the American workforce. About $46 billion a day in purchases, annually buying $315 billion in clothes, $250 billion in do-it-yourself home projects, 6.3 million cars, $361 billion in electronics, and so on. You can never give the rich enough money to support our economy, and why would you want to? Another issue is protect women's health, including reproductive freedom. The sanctity and independence of the human body is foundational to our democracy. Our Declaration of Independence speaks directly to personal rights, including the right to make our own choices. Just as no man can be forced to have a periodic colonoscopy, even though modern medicine has proved that it can save his life, no woman can be stopped from preventing pregnancy or be forced to remain pregnant. Unintended pregnancies and abortions are declining. I will support legislation that further reduces them, including expanding availability of all known techniques. These include education, long-acting reversible contraceptives, and the full range of birth control pills. I will also support educational efforts to help young adults understand the relationship between lifestyle and unprotected sex. Pregnancy should never be a punishment. I will oppose any legislation that reduces a woman's access to all health care. My opposition includes direct or indirect attacks on the medical clinics that provide that care or their funding. And that includes preventing international aid for family planning. I would ban fake news. We absolutely must have accurate, complete, and truthful news. Now, the very existence of journalism, of professional news, has been threatened by Trump, who actually treated the nation's news media as the enemy of the American people. Turning to the issue of fake news, I've heard many people say that both sides of news are biased. This is because we're not taught the difference between bias and propaganda. Bias is the unintentional and unavoidable influence of everything we see and do and hear and learn and pick up from parents and friends and church and work and life. Bias will always be with us. Propaganda, on the other hand, is the systematic attempt of one group of people to manipulate another group of people through the selective use of truth, lies, and silences. And by silences, I mean not providing information that conflicts with the intended message, and that renders the message a lie. Bias is unavoidable. Propaganda is deliberate action stemming from an agenda. When viewers look at a widely watched and trusted national program branded as Fox News, or as I call it, Fox Not the News, they are not seeing a news channel. You will never follow a story on Fox Not the News that relentlessly reports that any Democratic lawmaker or Democratic Party position or Democratic passed law is a positive thing for America. Instead, the stories relentlessly support Republican attacks on Democrats. Viewers turn to Fox Not the News to have their prejudices, their fears, even their hatreds confirmed, but they never get the whole truth. Too many people are looking for confirmation, not information. Too many only want to hear that they're right about what they already believe, or as Paul Simon famously saying, a man hears what he wants to hear and disregards the rest. The Fox channel was licensed under the FCC rules as an entertainment channel, but it is branded on the lower left corner of every screen shouting Fox News. Why? Because during the Reagan administration, the FCC's Fairness Doctrine was canceled. The Fairness Doctrine required journalistic standards, including contrasting points of view. Literally, the fair and balanced tagline that Fox Not the News only recently dropped because polls showed that even its own viewership stopped believing the slogan. I will author legislation to pass a 21st century version of the Fairness Doctrine so that when people tune into news, on TV, on the radio, on the internet, that it is presented with journalistic standards of accuracy, completion, and truth to protect America from propaganda. I would end labor exploitation. The biggest cause of our humanitarian problem with illegal immigration is exploitation. Americans don't hire people who come here illegally out of kindness. They do it for greed, because those poor, desperate people will work for starvation wages rather than return to the dangerous conditions in their home countries. It does not serve America's long-term interests or moral authority to undermine our wage structure and to commit to a never-ending struggle at our borders. I will support full citizenship for the minors who came to this country as a decision of their desperate parents. However, there are literally millions of African Americans, whites, Native Americans, and Asian Americans who do not have jobs or do not live with livable wages. And it is simply wrong for our citizens to be pushed aside while other, more desperate people agree to come to America to be exploited. I will work to replace right to exploit laws with livable wage laws. Saving the internet. The internet used to be open and free with zero controls and consistent speed. Now we face preferential speed for large customers. But speed is not the biggest threat. It is free speech. A company that can slow down your data stream can also cut it off or make it nearly unusable. I will absolutely reverse the FCC decision to end net neutrality, which was made by refusing to act on thousands of negative comments. Sustainability. An environmentalist is someone who recognizes that the fabric of life is all connected, that this torn fabric is in danger of collapse, and we must act now to reverse the destructive decline of the biosphere upon which all life depends. Sustainability uses the precautionary principle, pollution prevention, innovation, and substitution to not harm our water, air, and soil. Environmental repair is costly and time-consuming. For instance, do Georgians want to wait half of their adult lives for natural forces to repair any offshore oil drilling damage that was done in pursuit of profit, like America suffered in Alaska and along the Gulf Coast, or see their pristine Appalachian wilderness slowly eroded by development? I have devoted my life to saving the environment, and I will apply the principles of sustainability to all legislation. Now, what I've noted barely scratches the surface of the challenges that face this nation. Those include they include tax fairness, prison reform, universal health insurance, using soft power for peace, and power projecting against global threats. Clean energy, supporting veterans, equal pay for work, global warming, affordable education, and of course, campaign finance reform. But for now, I'll finish with the most topical issue: protecting the Mueller investigation of the Russian attack on our 2016 election. U.S. intelligence has already confirmed that the 2016 election attack occurred. Some of our voting systems are at risk of hacking, even so. In the process of learning about that, information has been discovered that has led to guilty pleas and indictments. Everything must be done to protect and continue this investigation. The fate of our democracy might hang in the balance. I will be a full party to actions against the guilty. So what about Doug? Well, Doug Collins voted over 90% of the time with President Trump and fully embraces this president. When you go to his official website, he brags that he manages every piece of legislation that comes to the floor. The disasters in Congress are on him. When Doug writes on his website, put decisions back in the hands of parents and teachers and state and local officials, he means stop teaching evolution and science and force his religious teachings into the public classroom. When he writes respect the Constitution, he means put gun ownership above everything else. When he writes hold those who break the law accountable, he means unless they're Republicans or Trump, who refuses to apply the congressional sanctions against the Russians. When he writes rein in government spending, reform entitlement programs, reduce costly red tape, and clean out waste and fraud in government programs, he means so that I can give tax cuts to the wealthy. When he writes the Affordable Care Act is failing, he is directly lying, and he knows it. When he writes the current structure of Social Security and Medicare is failing, what he means is that I needed that money to pay over $1 trillion to the wealthy and large corporations, so I'll cut your benefits and other people's. Medicare means defund parts of it. Improve the business climate means cancel our safety and regulatory protections. It goes on. Nearly every regulation was written because someone stole from or otherwise hurt someone else. Finally, when he writes religious liberty, what he really means is encourage religious bigotry and homophobia. Doug's inclusion of the phrase religious liberty on his website is a dog whistle for attacking lesbians, gays, bisexuals, and the transgendered. There are millions of Americans who are in some ways homosexual, including many in North Georgia of all genders and of both political persuasions. The LGBT are our first responders, our healthcare providers, our inventors, our warriors, and taxpayers. Present in every aspect of our lives, including leaders in faith communities. As a nation, we weep when a soldier returns to us in a flag-draped coffin, and we don't ask, what state is he from? What religion is she? What color is he? What political party is she? Or whether he is LGBT. The same respect and gratitude must be included full rights and privileges when that American is alive. The First Amendment is designed to protect your right to praise God and pursue everlasting life in the way you see fit, but it does not create any right to attack others for their religious beliefs, or for their sexuality. For those Georgians who believe that salvation comes solely through grace, through faith alone, and never through good acts, there is no cruel action taken against an LGBT that is supported by your faith-based pursuit of redemption. And absolutely, under U.S. law, you have no authority to use biblical faith as a justification to deny any American the full use of our shared economic system. For Doug to use religion as a basis for hate and to expect you to vote for him deeply offends me. 10 years of Catholic school taught me a few things, and I remember some important passages like Matthew 7, which includes, you will know them by their fruits. When Doug gives most of the wealth to the rich and nothing to the poor, you will know him. When Doug takes health care from the poor and disabled, you will know him. When Doug spends most of his time with his wealthy friends and almost no time in his district, you will know him. North Georgia must not send Doug back to Congress. The behavior of Trump and the Republican elected officials poses an existential threat, not an incidental threat, to the survival of democracy. When they attack our FBI, it is well beyond legislative malpractice. When they attack the courts and the press, it is well beyond legislative malpractice. When they jam laws through against massive public resistance and with zero support from Democrats, it is well beyond legislative malpractice. It is the movement towards an absolute dictatorship of the rich. If you find yourself incapable of voting for a Democrat under any circumstances, even with Republicans displaying evidence of treason or the threat of Trump's impeachment, or after recognize the pattern of malfeasance and corruption from the many items I've listed earlier, then American democracy has failed. We must all put country before party. Let me be clear. My candidacy is 100% about protecting the American political system by opposing the current Republican Party and Trump. Please remember that the end game is November 6th, not May 22nd. For the sake of all of us, you need to make a choice as to the candidate that is most likely to defeat Doug Collins, a man who apparently holds Trump more dear than his own country. North Georgia can and must lead in sending a message that rejects the current Republican Party. That party only listens to two things: money and the vote. Most of you don't have the money to influence legislation, but every one of you has your precious vote. You have the direct power to stop the accelerating slide toward the collapse of the rule of law, leading to dictatorship. And if dictatorship happens, you likely won't live to see the future return to democracy. I recently became a parent, a grandparent, for the first time. And I can tell you that the future is never more present than when you stare into the eyes of your grandchild. I want so much for my country to heal itself and be a place of joy and community. I see the potential in every student that gave donations to the needy, and in every helping hand that cleared a trail, and in the heroic stories, the media reports of space conquest and neighborhood renewal, and much more. I want to continue my life of service to a nation I know so well. Please support me by visiting my website, which is Cooper4congressga.com, and my campaign Facebook page, which is Cooper4congressga, and we'll be live soon. And follow me on Twitter using @DC4congressga. Running for national office is a mammoth task, but I freely offer up my energy and my ironclad commitment. To quote a famous Georgian, my faith demands that I do whatever I can wherever I am, whenever I can, for as long as I can, with whatever I have, to try and make a difference. Let North Georgia lead. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.